And today we're going to be doing a workshop based on the information of how the Coherence device works and how people can actually take advantage of the device for their various projects. Is that me making that noise? Shouldn't be. Yeah. Why we've got two of me on the screen, people who are watching, is that I've got my phone operating as well, because during this workshop I'm going to get up and go and actually get on the table, and we're going to have we're going to show you live how it actually operates. So, Anne, would you like me just to introduce it, or would you like to ask me questions? What would you like
Yes,
to do?
obviously everybody knows you already. And one of the big things you did the last years is working on this coherence device that enhances the coherence in the minds and in the body of human beings. And I just want you to introduce it and to talk a bit on the theory, maybe tune in a bit in the Gnostic theories and in your new development of this Gnostic square, and then dig deeper into the frequencies and how we can align all the minds in the body to gain more coherence, which gives us the possibility to opt out of this fight, flight, freeze mechanism.
Yeah, it gives us the chance to actually move out of unconscious suffering. That's really the big goal, is to get away from unconscious suffering. So suffering itself is a topic which is highly misunderstood, and the nature of struggle, we can do conscious suffering, or we can do unconscious suffering. And most people walking the planet, and we're talking about 99.9999% of people, are engaged and lost in unconscious suffering. And the path of Buddha and other saints is the path towards conscious suffering, which is where we apply struggle in the enlightenment process. So we really put our energies actually into that enlightenment process. So if we dig all the way back and have a look into it, I have a background very early on where I was trained as a clinical hypnotherapist. And to begin with, I was just trained in hypnotherapy for myself. So like, this was self-hypnosis. And my dad taught me. So he along with my other brothers and sisters, we were, or many of us were taught how to do self-hypnosis. And it was a wonderful tool, an amazing thing. And in hypnotherapy, when whether you're doing it to yourself or to a client, you fundamentally are working with the brainwave states of the head. So it's the neurological functioning, the way the wavelengths, or the frequency at which the brain is actually processing. And the relaxed state that you work with in hypnotherapy is called alpha, and it's somewhere between 7 and 11 or 12 hertz. It's in that range. The different people, have different levels for that kind of thing. But I worked for a very long time with hypnotherapy, and to this day I still work with myself and with clients with hypnotherapy. Hypnotherapy itself, just on its own, has been quite tremendously superseded by work that I've done subsequently, and certainly over the last 10 years, the work that I've been doing has taken me to places, beyond what I could do in self-hypnosis, as an example. But nonetheless, the fundamental process and where it comes from is from this hypnotherapy background. Now, people have been doing hypnotherapy, either self-hypnosis or, more often than not, actually being done by a practitioner for a client, using the sort of terminology in modern times, and by modern times I mean the last few hundred years. But the skills of hypnotherapy have been utilized by shamans and priests going back thousands and thousands of years. So the process of hypnotizing a person is no different today than it was in ancient Greece or ancient Egypt, or even further back. You can go even further back and you'd find that there's the same type of processes in place. One of the things that also came with this training as a hypnotherapist when I was a boy was the knowledge that we have more than one brain. And even from the time I was a little boy, I began thinking about this, and I'm thinking, oh, we're hypnotizing this head brain, but what about the other brains? You know, what about the brain in the heart or in the thorax? And what about the brain in the gut or the brain in the spine? And so I parked it because I didn't have any way of actually, working with the answer of that question. And probably 10, 15 years ago, I became aware of a lot of the heart work that was being done. I didn't know at the time that it was coming from the Heart Math Institute, which I know you are, well trained in as a practitioner and so on. But I didn't realize that that particular organization was doing this work, but I was certainly aware of the work in meditation where you would become more coherent in the heart, and that there was this linkage between the head brain and the heart brain. So like I already knew, 15 years ago, say, that there was a heck of a lot going on worldwide in this territory. So there was a lot of work going on and a lot of people gaining a lot of success. But even so, this was not satisfying, my precocious and, this sort of curiosity-based nature that I have as to what about the other brains? We know that we've got a gut brain. We know we've got a brain in the spine, quite separate to the brain in the head. And we know we have a brain in the pelvis, on the pelvic floor. And so I would ask this question, what do we do? Or how could we go about actually gaining what we would call an alpha-like state in these other brains? So certainly throughout all of this process, I was not aware of the real research base that was going on with the Heart Math Institute around these brain frequencies of the thorax, so like the entire thoracic area. So thorax is the area between the breathing diaphragm, the actual inlet diaphragm up in here, and all around in your rib cage and your lungs and your heart and so on. So this is the heart brain, as it's called. And it's not just focused on the heart organ, it's all the way through the thorax. And so, that work that was sort of frequency based that they were doing, and their ability to actually examine and show a heart field, that there was this large heart field of influence that another person could actually interact with, and that it varied depending on what was going on in a person's life. That information was sort of kind of subconsciously understood by myself, but it was not really put so much into words. Anyway, about 2 years ago, I decided that what I would do is actually have a proper go at seeing if I could hypnotize these other brains. And so first of all, what I needed to do was actually work out what the frequencies might be. So we've talked about alpha for the head brain, but what is an alpha-like state for the heart brain? What is an alpha-like state for the throat, for the abdominal brain? So this brain of the gut, the pelvic brain, the spinal brain. And I couldn't find any information about that. I couldn't find specific stuff. There's lots of work being done about frequency, particularly sound frequencies, with all kinds of things to do with chakras and lots of work. So there's heaps of people all around the world doing all sorts of works in all kinds of fields that were very close to what I was interested in, but none of them were really particularly addressing the stuff I was really interested in. Sorry, did you want to comment?
No, I just said nothing was really in the field. It was all around, but nothing really in the field.
That's exactly right. So, look, I just went through a process of meditation and working with a pendulum, which is another technique for gaining, great access and insight into what's happening in your subconscious mind. So I'll talk a little bit about these minds, because you probably need to hear that first before I talk about how I went about finding these frequencies. So, we know, and this has been knowledge for hundreds, if not thousands of years as well, is that we have a subconscious and we have a conscious mind. And then we have some other stuff which is able to reach out to the universe. And we have some stuff which is deep, very, very deep. So many theorists actually talked about the idea of a sub of the subconscious mind. So this is deep, deep stuff. for which you can't actually see specifically, you can't get the information from, but you get the you get the shadow of it, or you get the you get to know it's there by virtue of the fact that things are going on which are not even in the subconscious mind. Subconscious mind is something which we're able to access directly out of hypnotherapy or meditation, deep meditations, and of course our dream world. When we're dreaming, most of our dreams occur actually in alpha. So like it's not in the very deep part of sleep, which is theta. It's happening in the alpha aspect of it as we were doing dreaming. And for 20 years plus, 30 years, 40 years, I've been working with myself and with other people with their dreams, actually assisting them to get a dialogue going so that they can actually kind of instruct their subconscious mind in such a way that the subconscious mind has a common language with the conscious mind. And through the dreaming, they can use this common language to open up a dialogue. And with people that I've done a lot of this work with, the dialogue is amazingly concise, really concise, really together. And but it takes some work. It really takes some work, and you have to train it. And you reinforce the subconscious mind, and you say, okay, subconscious mind, I got it. I understood what that imagery was, the way that all of this imagery worked. I get it. I actually understand that. The subconscious mind then beautifully forevermore keeps delivering up that particular aspect of the message using that language. So that actual language keeps coming through. Mm-hmm. And, you're able to go more and more and more deeply into it and diversify the language left and right. Anyway.
Can I ask a question in between? You talked about going very deep and going to theta. Where is it where lucid dreaming starts and where we definitely interact with the subconscious through dreaming and interacting in our dreams or directing consciously our dreams?
It's a wonderful question, and it's not clear the actual frequencies that are involved in lucid dreaming, because lucid dreaming can occur within alpha, but it could also occur in theta. So lucid dreaming could be occurring in theta as well. Lucid dreaming requires that you actually bring an aspect of your conscious mind into your dream. So it requires retaining an element of alpha at the very least, if not beta. Beta being, your standard conscious mind conditions. But you have to bring elements of that into the dream process. And that's where the lucid dreaming occurs. So you actually, it's an integration of it. Mm-hmm. And that's a great question, because from the perspective of coherence, the work that we're doing with this coherence device, which we're going to be showing today, is highly in this region. Because what's it about? It's about being able to actually be in a place where the subconscious mind is completely open, and at the same time have the superconscious working. Have the conscious mind, have the ego actually completely bared and open. We'll talk more about those different levels in a moment as well. But that's a good question.
Second question is, when you want to work with that, from lucid dreaming, I know that you have to drink a lot. That when you really want to do lucid dreaming and want to enter that realm, that you should at least drink 5 liters per day. Clear water. Is it in using the coherence device the same?
Hydration is important, and particularly really the drinking the water for the lucid dreaming is about activating the instinctive center. So the instinctive center is the mind of the gut, or the abdominal brain, and the drinking has the effect of actually stimulating the flow process for the instinctive center. So that's actually what that's mainly about. The coherence device, well, look, it's a good idea to be drinking plenty of water anyway. Like hydration and particularly the cleansing, like that notion of cleansing that comes with the whole idea of drinking 5 liters of water, which is, it's an astronomical amount of time that you're going to be going to the bathroom when you're drinking that much water. So, it's important to realize that suggestion that the instinctive mind or the gut brain is actually getting by virtue of what you're doing. That's a very important aspect of it. Does that answer the question? Make sense?
Yes.
My take. I'm not saying for a moment that any of these things that I'm saying are anything other than just what I understand. That's just how I understand it. So we talked a little bit there about these levels of the mind. And of course, when we first started doing this coherence device, my intention was the brains, the actual physical body. So we talked about an alpha-like state. So that's the brain waves cycling around, somewhere between 7 and 11 hertz as being alpha, something in that region. Mm-hmm. And that's a physical brain thing. That's something that you can put electrodes onto your head and measure. You can actually measure that cycling, electrical cycling that's going on in the head brain. What we've just been talking about is the cycling of these minds. And so there's a frequency of cycling that relates to the subconscious mind, that deep stuff that you can't see, but you know is there by inference. Mm-hmm. And the subconscious mind and the ego, if we're talking about the intellect, it's the ego as well. And the conscious mind, so we're talking at the moment, and whilst I'm in alpha at the moment, so I'm actually running myself in alpha, even so, my conscious mind is very active as well. So like there's some conscious mind aspect and some subconscious going, quite near the surface at the moment. And of course, there's a superconscious, and it has a frequency as well. So the superconscious is what allows you to make these discontinuous jumps. So from a physics perspective, like it's commonly talked about in, alternative medicine and thought and philosophy and that sort of thing at the moment. They talk about, quantum, everything's quantum. We're going away from the old science and we're going into quantum science and all that kind of stuff. Well, what does that really mean? What it means is this idea of a discontinuous jump, and where two things can be true at the same time, which are completely different, and they can both be true. And it can be that they can both exist at the same time, and it's impossible for them to exist at the same time. And when we look at the idea of, when we get to the concept of ideas, so mind level stuff. So all this mind level stuff is about ideas, and I'll talk about how an idea can work with these other brains in a moment. But it's the discontinuous thinking. So it's the ability to be in one place and then jump somewhere completely different. That comes from the superconscious. That comes from this level, which is, if we were to put a hierarchy, subconscious at the bottom, subconscious above that, ego sitting on top of that, conscious mind sitting on top of that, and then on top of that would be the superconscious. And the ego and the conscious mind can be looked at as being part of the same thing, but they have different frequencies. So we'll talk about that in a moment as well. So where was I? Yeah, so there's a frequency for those things. So we're talking about the head brain now, and the head brain supports the mind of the intellect. Mm-hmm. And the mind of the intellect is made up of a sub of the subconscious aspect, a subconscious aspect, an egoic aspect, a conscious aspect, and a superconscious aspect. So there's five different aspects of the intellect, and the intellect is associated with the head brain. It's just associated with it. And you were asking me to perhaps talk a little bit about the these sort of tables and that type of thing that we developed. So Marianne, in her conversations with me, I'll say this to everybody else, 6-7 years ago now, asked me to try and sort of explain what I was talking about with these 5 brain models and how that it all worked with, the interactions between all these brains and all these minds. And, fundamentally, there is an intellectual aspect of all of the other minds. So, and there's actually an intellect function, a brain function within the other brains as well. Very interesting how all that works. So 5 5s are 25. There's 25 different aspects of these things within within your system. So we'd be looking at 25 elements if we really wanted to go down that track. May as well go down, seeing as we're in complexity, we may as well go all the way with the complexity now. And the other aspect of all of this that we're looking at, so that's actually of just the conscious aspect, by the way. We've got all of the elements, you know, the layers in there as well to, you know, to go really crazy. So we could say 25 times 5 would be, so 125 would be the identifiable pieces that we could work with, and that we could work with specifically actually in therapy, and that we actually do work with in therapy. So in a client, it happened, you know, it'll come to pass that they are struggling with the superconscious aspect of the intellect of the sex center, as an example. So that would be one of the 125 options, and we'd go in there and we would stimulate that, particularly in the work that we're doing with the Coherence device, along with the other things that we were needing to try and get balance and coherence to actually happen. And away we go. So that would be an example of how you do it. And in real time, when we're working with the Coherence device, we're working with that level of detail. We are working with that level of detail.
Just for an example, when we're thinking of the superconscious of the intellect of the sex center, we have clients in which that works proper, and we have clients in which that doesn't work proper. So there's a duality or polarity. Can you just pinpoint the two ends of that?
Well, there's more than one duality there. So you're talking about it working or not working. We definitely can work with that, and but we can also look at the yin and the yang aspect of that piece as well. And indeed, with the Coherence device, we actually specifically go in there and we look at the yin and yang aspects of these things, or the duality nature of them, because that's what we're really interested in. That point is that there are dualities occurring, and dualities, when they're resolved, you know, you can leap past them. You can use that superconscious ability to leap.
But just to know where are we there when we are talking of the superconscious of the intellect of the sex center? Are we there in communication levels, or where are we there?
Okay, well, what that would be, you know, and this is an easy example to work with, because the sex center is all about communication. So it's about communication, cooperation, collaboration, and everything to do with actually forming communities and forming, you know, the ability to interact. So sex center, for example, has a big relationship with the communication with the microbial community within our body, as an example. Equally, people that we meet in the street, the sex center is tremendously involved in whether we can actually immediately connect with a person or not. The superconscious aspect of the intellect of it. So if you say, for example, you pass the same person when you're walking the dog every day, and you try to make connection and communicate with this person, the intellectual aspect of the sex center would look at it and say, why are we having problems with this? What's going on? It would want to dig into and actually understand and find out why it was that there was a problem with the communication with that person that we pass every day with our dog. So this is an intellectual aspect of the sex center. So we're not thinking about it up here. We're thinking about it from us, but it's all about this communication and connection with this individual as we walk our dog. The superconscious aspect of it would be, here's a jump. We've made a jump of understanding. We've got aha. And the aha is not in amongst what we were just digging around. This aha is somewhere completely different. That would be the superconscious aspect of the intellect of the sex center in operation. Okay,
so while the intellect is pondering about why is there no proper communication with that person, this superconscious might see that that person is just occupied with some kind of drama.
It's likely that the emotional aspect of the sex center would be doing that. Okay. So it would be an empathy aspect of the sex center. So like it would be literally from the emotional sense. So let's talk about we'll try and go away from all that complexity, and we'll go back to simplicity. So simplicity is still, horribly a lot for people to get in one bite. But anyway, we'll talk through it. So the example here is the 5 brains. So we'll talk about the 5 physical brains. The minds are the intellect, emotional center associated with the thoracic brain, the instinctive center or instinctive mind associated with the gut brain. Can't see where I'm tapping my hand, but I'm tapping over my tummy at the moment. And then the spinal brain looks after all of the practical matter, so that's the moving center or moving mind. And then in the pelvic floor, not totally related to the sex organs, but including the sex organs, is the pelvic brain, which hosts the sex center or sex mind. And so those are the 5 brains, the 5 minds at the conscious level, and then each of those has all these different layers to it. And what we're just getting onto there about the the topic of how we're going to fix up this problem with the the person that we pass every day when we're walking the dog. The emotional mind, so the emotional center itself, can be engaged in that process and having empathy for the struggle of that person, and really having this deep empathy and love and compassion for that other person. So that's the emotions of the emotional center. So this is all up here. That's where it's all occurring. At the same time, and solving our problem, or while we're solving the problem with our sex center, which is all about the communication, this is where the nitty-gritty of how we're going to get on communicating with this person is coming from that mind. And while that's happening, the emotional aspect, which would be an empathic aspect of communication. So you could use the word understanding, but language is terrible here, because when we use the word understanding, we're thinking that it's intellectual. I'm not talking about an intellectual understanding here. I'm talking about an understanding within the communication process. So it's a deep understanding in communication would connect with empathy to that person, and that would be resolving part of this issue, and we could be looking at a superconscious aspect of that. So that it could be a superconscious empathy aspect that could be occurring in that communication aspect. I feel as though we're probably going down into such detail and such complexity that people with intellects like yours and perhaps me as well, I don't put myself quite in your category, but it's the sort of stuff that we like, that we're quite good at actually sort of managing and finding our way into, but it's not for everybody. It's not for everybody. Yeah. So we talked about the fact that there were all these frequencies and so on. And I started building the first coherence device with my only intention was to entrain, which is what you do with hypnotherapy. When you're doing hypnotizing somebody or hypnotizing yourself, you talk rhythmically, you talk slowly, you talk in a very similar meter and timbre. So the actual toning of your voice and all that sort of thing is called hypnotic. And it has the tendency to lull a person down into an alpha-like state. So how I'm talking at the moment would be an example of speaking in a hypnotic fashion. And when you do that, you can talk a person down, literally their intellect down. When I wanted to work with these other physical brains, I tried other things. So like the neural ganglia, so like there's all this neural ganglia up here, the hearing center, or for that matter, flashing. So like you could use visual stimulation, or the old day of Mesmer used to use a pendulum, swing the pendulum in front of the person's eyes, and that was enough to actually do it. So it's visual stimulation of the head brain, auditory stimulation of the head brain. You could do it with taste and touch and all that sort of thing as well, but they would all be sensors and they'd all be working on the head brain. So, and it's working on the neural ganglia. I wanted to stimulate and entrain the neural ganglia of the thorax. as the beginning. So I wanted to actually do that. And I tried all kinds of things. So I tried galvanic skin response. So a good example of using galvanic skin response is the TENS machine.
Mm-hmm.
And you pulse the TENS machine. You can pulse it at whatever frequency you want. And there's a little bit of success. So it worked a little bit. But I noticed that, you know, in the observations that I was making, is that the thoracic brain, sure, it was being entrained, but so were the other brains. So the other brains of the body were all becoming entrained to the same frequency, which is not what I wanted, because I knew that the 5 brains had 5 different frequencies, that they all had different frequencies associated with them. But anyway, I tried that, and I tried magnetic pulsing. So I was pulsing magnetic frequencies. What else did I try? I tried sound. But all of these other techniques had the impact of stimulating. There was too wide a coverage of it. So like if you use sound, all of the brains were hearing it.
Yeah.
So they were all getting that stimulation. In the end, I thought I'd try far infrared, because I knew that the far infrared penetrated deeply enough. So it'll penetrate sort of 7,500 millimeters into tissue before too much of it gets absorbed. So obviously, right from the skin, some of it's being absorbed at the skin level, but enough of it goes deep enough that there's an opportunity to actually stimulate these neural ganglia. And so I tried it. So we tried it and tried pulsing it, and had some real success. So like it was a real success of actually stimulating these other neural ganglia. So the big bundles of neural ganglia in the thorax and in the abdomen, in the spine and in the pelvic floor, that I could get it moving. And that was very exciting. You know, it was very exciting to actually, you know, get that going.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, long and the short of that was that we built a machine and trialed it out and tested it for a few months. And no sooner had I started doing that than I noticed that there was an iffy type of stimulation occurring with the minds as well, so that the actual intellect was being entrained. And so I wanted to experiment with that as well. So I actually built myself version 2, which we're going to have a look at in a moment. And version 2, I wanted to do 2 aspects of the minds plus the physical body. That was my idea. So I had 3 frequencies that I could play into each of these neural ganglia. Mm-hmm. And very, very successful. No sooner had I started doing that than I realized that I could actually stimulate all of these layers of it. I actually thought that I was stimulating, when I originally came up with these frequencies for the minds, I knew that I could do a yin and the yang aspect, which I thought would be very useful. And I always believed that what I was, the frequencies that I was working with to begin with, were the conscious mind frequencies. Interestingly enough, what I was given in meditation were actually the subconscious frequencies, and they were the ones that I was working with. No sooner had I started doing that, and I realized that the cat was out of the bag, and that there was an opportunity to work with frequencies that would suit the subconscious mind, subconscious and conscious, and the superconscious as well. And then much later, I realized that I could actually stimulate the egoic aspects. So the intellect, the egoic or imaginary concepts of the intellect we call the ego, and the imaginary aspects of the heart brain or the heart mind or the emotional center, we call the pain body. And this is language which is quite commonly used. I've never been able to find any language for this imaginary structures of the gut brain or the instinctive mind, but I call it the authority, because the problem with it is it thinks it knows the best, and it knows exactly what's right and what's wrong. And in the pelvic floor, the sex center, the shadowy or imaginary concept down in the pelvic floor region is the opposite of connecting. It's about separating. So I call it the separator. So this egoic aspect of the sex center I call the separator. The spinal brain is all about being the authority. So it's about power and dominance. It's about being the strongest in the group, and it's all about being the authority. So I call it the authority, the shadowy aspects. Anyway, I was working with the separator, the ego, the main body, the separator, and the authority, and all of them, working with all 5 of them, and we began to actually realize that we could actually work with them specifically. And I didn't realize that just how powerful and how useful that would be. Long and the short of all that's in there, and we've got frequencies for them all, yin and yang aspects of them, plus also ones which are specifically really activating both of them, both the yin and the yang aspect of each of these things. And then lastly, of course, just before the corona outbreak, I was on the table myself, and I was doing more research and finding out more stuff about it, working with clients and all that type of thing, the way that I'm going to show in a moment. And mine's just gone blank, which is interesting. Jolly Candida started talking to me.
Yeah.
So I was working, with a particularly deep one. So I was working with the superconscious and the subconscious mind. So it's the real deep stuff. And I was working with the stuff which allows you to jump out and make the huge giant ahas. And the Candida started talking to me. And they told me that I needed to do a whole lot of other things and write a book and all the rest of it, which we'll talk a little bit about in a moment. But it was an interesting time. And then, of course, I was about ready to, I was dutiful and actually followed the advice of the Candida and wrote the book about my conversations with them, or with the Hive Mind, the Candida Hive Mind, at least anyway. And no sooner had I sort of got 90% of the way through that project and the coronavirus, the whole catharsis that's gone on struck, and next thing I know, we're mounting a congress and a summit and a FutureLink and everything else that we've been doing, which has sort of superseded it. But nonetheless, that's sitting there ready to go, and we've almost got the book ready to publish. So we'll publish that in the next few weeks, hopefully. So
question coming in. Bettina wrote that even some neurologists accept the superconscious. To bring this knowledge under the people and scientists would be great help for human beings, except the indigenous people who do know this very well and do have access to it. Isn't it so?
Absolutely. So if we think about the people in indigenous culture here in Australia, with the nations, or the gangs, as Auntie Marana calls them, or mobs, they just have absolute access to the superconscious world, and they can exist for days at a time in connection to the superconscious world. So these things that we're talking about are completely second nature for people in the Aboriginal culture. So look, I agree with what Bettina's talking about. I absolutely agree with that. So anyway, the last piece of that puzzle was that the Candida themselves actually gave me a communication frequency to work with them, which, I'm just having a look at it at the moment. It's 4,212 is the frequency, and it's the frequency of coherence for the hive mind itself, so for the Candida hive mind. So let's talk a little bit about coherence anyway. If we were fully coherent, if we were Buddha, if we'd actually managed to, yesterday when it was Friday, if we'd managed to become a Buddha, we would be completely coherent. So all of these mind aspects and our physical body and our spirit. So we're not talking about any of these spiritual aspects at all yet. We've only been talking about minds and the physical body at the moment. But it all would be coherent with each other, which means that all of it would be available and accessible. The shadow, so in other words, the ego and the natural, the intellect, for example, if we're talking about the head mind, or that mind associated with the head brain, would be identical. So that piece that we call the ego and the piece that we call the conscious mind aspect of the intellect would be identical. There would be no difference. So for you and I, because we're not Buddha, there's a separation, there's a difference between our ego and our intellect. Our intellect has some stuff that it does, and our ego has some other stuff that it does. And they're not the same. And the path, the Buddha by Friday path that we're working with, and we're going to work with people and these challenges and all the rest of it, is the path of coherence, where we get each of these shadow minds. So, for example, the separator and the sex center, we get it to come closer and closer together, so that they become to the point where they become the same. They literally become identical. And at that point, you've got coherence occurring. Particularly, we're assuming that at the same time you've got access into the subconscious mind, the subconscious mind, the conscious mind, and up into the superconscious at the same time. So you're able to actually integrate all of these things. So coherence is about full integration, full balance, full harmony between all of these aspects of the minds and the body. The body being the 5 physical brains we're talking about here. Then we get into the actual, because we're talking about the microbial community, we're talking about coherence with the entire microbiota. So this is all the fungus, all of the bacteria, all of the viruses, all of the parasites, everything. We've got full coherence with the body aspect. So this is the actual physical organisms, microorganisms within our body. And we're also coherent with the mind aspects of all these things as well. So once again, we come back to our the coronavirus thing. Just a piece of information, it's viral information, but it's hugely mind-based. There's this massive mind aspect of viral activity, and we become coherent with the information of the virus. So this topic of coherence, as Neil is talking about it at the moment, it's big. Like, to be coherent, to actually be coherent like that, you're Buddha. You've done it. You've actually become Buddha once you actually become coherent.
Yeah.
So it's no small task, but it's a journey, and it's what we're doing. So the the obvious thing that actually came out of this was to make a version 3 of the Coherence device, which I designed, and I began instructing a team of engineers actually based in Pakistan. So this is a huge shout out to Mohsin Khan and his team at Deep Neural Labs, which I love. I love it that his organization is called Deep Neural Labs, and he and his team are working away at the moment, not on version 3 but on version 4. So version 3 was a programmable thing where we had 15 channels, so three channels for each of the brains, and I realized as they were starting the process of making it that was wildly inadequate. So what we've ended up with is 10 channels for each of the 5 physical brains. So we've got 50 channels, all of them programmable. They're going to be programmable via an app, which will work off your phone or your tablet or whatever. Mm-hmm. And be able to do preset programs for specific areas of coherence we're wanting to work with, whether it be a health issue or psychiatric or psychological issue, whether it be an issue of metabolism, whether it be an issue of personal development. So stuff to do with forming these communities, how you go about doing communities, all that kind of stuff. We can set up a whole lot of presets. And with the version 4, it is fully user configurable as well. So probably find that we'll have 2 variants of this device. We'll have one which is for practitioners, because they need a heap of training. It's going to need, you can tell already from what we're talking about in this workshop.
Quite complicated.
Well, there's some stuff in it, there's some stuff, and to be able to actually utilize it in some sort of coherent way, moderately coherent way, you're going to need some training. It's definitely going to be the case. So, we'll have a device based on that. And then the second device will be a user, just an end user device, which will be paired up with what we could call meditations, or I don't know quite exactly how you'd use it, but you'd use the machine at the same time that you were listening to a guided meditation type of process, and there'd be visualizations and sensory feeling and so on and so forth in it. And that's what it's looking like at the moment. So version 4, which Moshin Khan and his team in Pakistan at the moment, they are building version 4, which is the practitioner level device. And then following on from that will be something which people will better use at home, because as I say, like having a fully programmable device, if you're operating from home, is sort of, it's like giving somebody a, I don't know, hugely complex factory and all they've really got the ability to do is plug in a CD. So that would be it's the wrong thing, you know, like it just doesn't make sense to do. Okay, so any questions? Because I'm about to, I'm going to share my screen. First of all, before we do that, I'll share my screen. And on the screen at the moment.
So while the screen is shared, good possibility to write questions in the chat if there are some.
Yep. So this little chart here, which is up there, you can see there's the head, the thorax, the spine.
No, we cannot see it yet, Neil. We cannot see it yet. No.
Curious.
Please share it again. Yeah, this looks this looks good. Okay.
And you can pinch it out to get a bigger view if you're looking on a phone or something like that. So anyway, on the left-hand side, going down, we can see we've got the head, the thorax, the spine, the abdomen, the pelvis, and the candida. So this chart is in the conversations with candida. So I'm putting things out in the open. It's freely available. So it's the brain, so it's part of the body. Then the subconscious, conscious, the imaginary or egoic level, and then the superconscious level. In terms of, if it was a hierarchy, then the egoic stuff would actually sit before the conscious mind. But anyway, that doesn't make a difference really. Then you can see a whole bunch of numbers in here. And you can see that the physical brain just has numbers down here. So 9 for the alpha is in the head. That's the average of the alpha range.
So you're talking of hertz here.
Hertz, yeah. So this is beats per second.
Mm-hmm.
And then the thorax, or the thoracic brain, is 19. The spine is 28. The abdomen is 6, and the pelvis is 92.
Wow, what a difference!
Yeah. And so the idea of trying to do all the stuff from alpha, Marianne, like, you know, pure alpha, which would be 9, is just, there's no wonder it never worked.
Yeah.
It's just no wonder. That's why, you know, the heart math had to go to so much trouble to, you know, to get the heart into a relatively coherent state. And then what we've got then is in that big rectangle there at the top, under the sub of the subconscious mind, that's the average of the sub of the subconscious of the head brain, which is part of the intellect. And then there's a yin and a yang aspect of it. So we've got 53 for the sub of the subconscious and as an average, and then 49 and 58 for the yin and the yang aspect of it, and so on and so forth. So all these numbers are there, all published. And you can see that as you go higher and higher, that the numbers actually do get bigger. Mm-hmm. Obviously that the imaginary ones are lower than, you know, so like the order of that is mixed up. I will fix it up before we publish the book. So it's effectively a typo, what I've done there. But you can see, for example, the superconscious of the intellect is 1,823. Which is a high number compared with 9. Mm-hmm. What is really interesting is that
really if you think of the superconscious, 1,800 23 hertz. This is way beyond the possibility of an organ.
Yeah.
The head couldn't do it, the brain couldn't do it, the physical brain wouldn't be able to stand that amount.
Not simply. Yeah,
Not
no,
simply.
I know what you mean. So anyway, what just before we go off this page here, right at the bottom there is the Candida. So this is the hive mind, and the hive mind has got a frequency of 4,212,
Which
and
is very high.
it's extremely high, and higher than any of the mind aspects of our the human aspect, the so-called human aspect. Very interesting. When I was doing all of this work, I kept asking, did I need to have a like a hive mind variation for the viruses and one for the bacteria and that type of thing? What I was shown was that there were indeed frequencies for all of those things, but it wasn't really necessary to actually to actually identify them and work with them at the moment, because the Candida are so handy at acting as an interpreter and a communicator for all of these microbes, including the viruses. So, where we might have thought that, that there should have been, something else going on completely here, our views of Candida in general, which is that they're a very highly hostile and negative thing, like that's what people normally think about them. And yet here we see this tremendously cooperative, collaborative hive mind. And the way in which it's actually able to communicate and facilitate and translate, for all of this other microbial communities within the body, and the whole of the microbial community. So that was really interesting. So as of this moment, I haven't been drawn to actually have different frequencies for all of those other things, nor do we even have a frequency to summarize all of the microbial activity within the body. It hasn't been necessary. All that's been necessary is for us to be able to actually have access to the Candida hive mind. So I'll stop sharing that.
You have a question. We have some question here. When one doesn't have the chance to get access to the program, could it not be the emotions who can take care of the coherence? Like when I say to you, well done, Neil, then the message does not reach your intellect only, but also your ego and your heart.
It's common in our modern thinking that the heart is superior to the intellect, that the emotional center is superior to the intellect. And part of the reason why it has become such a popular concept is that people have been allowing the emotional center to actually have a say. They've been allowing the emotional center to actually participate. And it's a revolution. It becomes a revolution because it's been squashed and stymied and, shot down. When we start working with the other three minds as well, we start to realize the wisdom and the capacity and the capability of those minds. Where I end up in answer to that question is that all five minds are receiving all of this information and have the potential to be coherent and have the potential to reach understanding of the kind that they do. So the kind of understanding which is natural to them. And so there's no doubt about it, this thoracic brain and the emotional center, or the heart mind, has it's got the top capacity to manage any emotional content. So whether it be kindness or gratitude or love or compassion, any of those sorts of things, it has the most capacity in that area. But each of these minds can actually understand the complement and really benefit and grow from them. So in you know, sitting underneath that question is the question of, you know, what happens if we can't get access to a coherence device? Well, the obvious thing is that you keep working on yourself, and you keep working and opening up all of these 5 minds. You keep opening them up. You keep having them talk to one another. The reason for the coherence device, excuse me, the reason for the coherence device really came from the fact that I was observing in treatment that people couldn't talk from one brain to another. I have to find a glass of water. I'll be back. Okay. Be a disaster if I couldn't talk. Disaster for my ego, anyway. So, yeah, there's lots of ways to do it, and of course, the ancients and these schools, like these sort of Gurdjieff-based schools that my father was running, they working with these brains, multiple brains all the time, working with the communication between them, the development of each of them, ability to actually have like a 3-brain approach as they talk about it. You know, where one is initiating, another is questioning, and the third one is reconciling in some sort of way. All of that goes on. All of that's possible to be done without a coherence device. But it was, the huge trigger for me was actually working in clinic and just observing how little communication there was going on and the way in which they resisted. So one mind or brain would actually resist the transmission of information between 2 of the others. We saw it over and over and over again.
I guess we have to show an example here, but a very common example would be that let's say the guts are going to say, let's have an ice cream. It's hot weather, let's have ice cream. That would feel good. And the same moment the brain says, no, we are not close to it, we would have to drive, and then it has a lot of calories, so quit it. We constantly have our intellect running over the instinctive center.
That would be an example. So the communication one, the one that was coming up at the time when I finally made the decision, I said, I have to build one of these machines. I've got to work out some way of entraining these other brains, was the example of the sex center, so this pelvic brain, and the way in which it just did not trust the emotional center or the thoracic brain.
It's another
so
great example.
It would be saying, look at the trouble you got us into in the past. You with all your ideas of love and you know, the care and all this kind of stuff, and that fool of a man that you got us involved with, and so on. You know, like there's all this kind of stuff. And the sex center itself just doesn't trust the emotional center. Doesn't trust it. And so what it will do is it will come in and it will interfere with the communication between the emotional and the instinctive center. So the instinctive center is thinking, I want to have an ice cream. The intellect's saying, no, we're too far away. But at the same time, the sex center is actually coming in there and saying, no, we're not going to listen to what you want.
We're just going to phone and invite somebody and tell them, bring ice cream.
We'll do something like that. But anyway, that was an example of it. So using the coherence device really helps with getting the brains actually into an entrained state where the communication can begin. And it's all about, you know, baby steps. I'm quite sure when the, you know, we were talking right at the very beginning there of the corona, you know, pandemic thing, everybody was in a state of panic and they were, you know, just absolutely looping out with the all of the crazy thought that was going on around the place. And we did that little project with the pyramids. And the pyramids is an adaptation of the coherence device. It's a way of actually being able to do something at home. It's about trying to make sense out of the confusion that's going on all around us. So we developed that meditation to help with that. And that's the sort of stuff that can be done all the time. But it begins by actually being aware of the fact that there are these 5 brains, that they could potentially become coherent, that they have the ability to actually trust and communicate with each other, and that they have an evolutionary style. They have an evolutionary scale to them as well, so that they can, they begin as infants and they can grow all the way up to becoming an adult. And this is a really important thing. So, for example, that in that example that we were just talking about with the sex center not trusting the emotional center, for that matter, the emotional center often doesn't trust the sex center either, for different reasons. But anyway, with all of that stuff, it's just a matter of knowing it and actually recognizing that it exists, and then the process can begin to work to actually move out of these barriers, these resistances to communication, allow the flow of information to become more natural and more open. So, that's what's possible. And, indeed, we can see that happening. So you don't have to have a coherence device to do that. It's just much easier if you do, or if you're working with a practitioner that has one.
Yes, and for the frequency of the hive mind, it might just be interesting to tell that usually we would have a hierarchy between the intellect and the emotions and the instinct and the sex center. And what did I miss? The moving center. And of course, I'm missing the practical mind. And when we have the hive mind frequency, the first time we skip that hierarchy and we sit them at one table, each having the same voice and the possibility to talk. And this is the really new thing, that you give the instinct the same voice as you give it to the intellect, and you give the sex center the same voice as you give to the emotional center. And in between you have the practical mind, which is not superior or inferior, but has the same voice. And this is the start of a very interesting talk within yourself.
That's extremely interesting, how that all goes. And you're absolutely right. When we are working with the coherence device and we're working with the Candida frequency, with this version 4 that we're building at the moment, we'll be able to tune the hive mind frequency, the Candida hive mind frequency, into each of the physical brains at the same time. So we'll be able to do that along with other frequencies for specific purposes. And in that case, what we're doing is we're actually saying to all of the mind aspects, you're all at the table and you're all sharing with that frequency of the hive mind. So you're genuinely, at that point, every voice at the table is the same. It's all at the same frequency. It's interesting. It's a wonderful opportunity.
And to see it on the superconscious level, it is that you can tune in any being, wherever that being is, using the hive mind, and have that being sit on the same table and having a voice, which is why it is so comfortable to do treatment with it, even long distance treatment.
Yeah, there's two different ways that we've been doing treatment with the coherence device. To begin with, I just had people coming into the clinic. So they'd lie on the table and they'd be lying on the machine, which I'm going to show you in a minute. So they'd be lying on the machine. And then I would treat them intuitively. So like it's an asking process, you could call it, that we're working with. And the information is coming out of my system. So my system is giving me the answers, but my system is in communication with them. So they're in the entrained state. So we've got the client is actually in the entrained state. And my body and minds aspects of my being, you know, the chakras and meridians and everything else, are in communication with them. And I'm getting the information, you know, directly coming back from them. Interestingly enough, there's going to be an opportunity to work with the chakras and the meridians and all that type of thing with this device as well, but just not yet. That might be version 5. Got enough on my plate actually just working with the minds and the physical body at the moment. Well, I was going to say something else.
We were talking about long distance treatment.
Oh, yeah. So that's how it began. And then with the corona crisis, I couldn't have people coming here to the clinic. They wouldn't let me do that. I started to stick myself on the machine and become as coherent as I possibly could in the way of, you know, stimulating at least 3 aspects of these things within each of my minds. Plus also the, you know, the Candida Hive Mind frequency as well, which we could do separately. Because I added another channel and just specifically for that purpose. And anyway, the results were stunning in the extreme. So like it was just, I had no idea that it was going to be as different as it was. So me as the practitioner getting into a more coherent place allowed me access to information within the client it's an order of magnitude different. It's just different. It's at a different level. And so we began doing all this stuff obviously at a distance, because everybody's, you know, has to be in another country or at the very least at a different place. And so we did all this work, and very, very successful. And as I say, like new stuff, observations that, you know, regular Neil was completely incapable of. All of a sudden I was actually capable of getting information at whole different levels.
And you can't, and it's possible to not only do it with humans, you can do it with animals or plants as well, or communities.
Yeah, well, we did all that work. You know, we did it with all the work with the Candida. That's what came out of it. You know, lying there on the machine and the Candida starts talking to me. All of a sudden we've got this communication which is being facilitated by the Hive Mind, the Candida Hive Mind. All kinds of stuff. You know, I'm asking questions about what's going on and the suffering from the pollution, this thought pollution from humans, for example. You know, this is an example. And the Candida is talking to me about it and saying, oh, it's terrible at the moment. And it's the middle of summer, of course. It's hot and dry here in Perth at that time. And you realise that it's actually the fungus and how they're actually suffering. So that these are the fungus associated with the roots of the trees, how they're suffering firstly because there's not enough water. So like it's a very low rainfall time, and so they're struggling, they're really struggling, and they're struggling for the mind, the actual hive mind of the fungus of the trees to actually operate just because of that physical pressure. And then they started talking about this pollution that's coming from all the humans. And I'm realizing that, you know, we as humans, with all of our mad fear and our conspiracy theories and the panic and everything else that's going on, we're hurting. We're hurting these communities of microbes. They're suffering as a result of our crazy communication. Definitely. So all of that knowledge and understanding and the ability to communicate at that level definitely came out of the fact that I was forced by the corona pandemic to be on the table myself. If I hadn't had so many hours actually on the table working with other clients, I would never have actually seen that stuff in that way.
So why don't you show us the machine?
Okay, yeah, because too much me talking is boring. So what we'll do is I'm going to take this thing here. I'm pretty sure, yeah, so the microphone's on this one. So I've got to go in another part of the room. It's all a bit complicated. So you're not going to see me now because I'm going to turn the camera around. So this is the Coherence device. Mm-hmm. So this is the box. So it's just a briefcase full of all my electronics. So this is all stuff that I sold up, and thankfully Moshe Khan and his team are going to end up with something much smaller than this. But these screens that you can see in here, they're actually showing the frequencies for the 15 channels, which are originally for the brains. And this one over here, that's 4,200 and something or other, which is the frequency for the Candida Hive Mind. And so these are pulse wave modulators, and I soldiered all these things up. It took me a couple of months to actually do all of this and work out how to do it and all the rest of it. So these things here, they're all pumping out pulses of electricity, and the pulses of electricity come up into these pads. So these are the pads for the thorax, the abdomen, and the pelvis. And then this is the pad here. You can see the little LED lights along here. That's for the spine. So lie on top of that. And then up here is this very untidy looking head unit. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm. Yes, can see.
And this has got LEDs on each side by the ears, and it's got LEDs in the back here, which are shining into your head. So I'm going to stick my head up there. And that's the 5 pads and the 5 brains. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop that onto there. And hopefully you'll be able to see me lying down there. And can you hear me okay, Marianne?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, cool. All right, so I'll just jump up here onto the table and I'll make sure that, can you see me there?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm lying on the moving center one, the spinal brain. Got this one on the thorax,
mm-hmm.
the emotional center, gut brain here, and the pelvic brain here. And obviously these ones up here on my head, which is focusing on the intellect. Now the frequencies that I'm actually running at the moment are the egoic level. So this is the shadow mind, or however you want to describe that.
Mm-hmm.
You still hear me all right?
Yeah.
So we've got that. That's one of the frequencies, and here is the ego. The other one is the average of the superconscious. And then we've also got the average of the subconscious mind. So we're running subconscious, superconscious, and ego in each of the 5 brains. Now this is a brand new setting. I've not actually used this device for this purpose, but I was directed to do that today.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to ask for from yourself or from anybody watching, Marianne, if they would like me to do some treatment work, and we'll actually do it right now.
Let me see whether somebody has the courage to ask for it. But as far as I can see, nobody. I have here little Socrates, the cat.
Okay.
And he looks like asking for treatment.
Perfect. So I'll just get myself down into a coherently relaxed state. So this is a very interesting experience because I'm going down into an alpha-like state, which is the subconscious of each of these. I'm retaining an aspect of this ego for each of the 5 minds. And at the same time, I'm stimulating the ability to leap out of these minds to these big non-continuous ahas. So, does Socrates have a question for me?
If I understand him right, it is how to cope with his family member Tigris.
He definitely has that question, and this is a question of the sex center. Now, interestingly, of course, all of these cats have been neutered, And so the actual physical organ of the sex center has actually been in some ways sort of crippled.
Mm-hmm.
However, the functioning of the sex center as it relates to the physical brain, at least anyway, with the pelvic floor is still completely intact, as is bladder, which has a strong interaction here. But there's a further question actually that Socrates has, and it's a question, perhaps his intellect with it, we'll find it in a moment, but the question relates to aging. So what is it? Why is it that my body is aging? Why I remember as a kitten, I remember what that felt like. And, here my body is it's aging. As the years go past, it's aging.
Oh, he saw little Bobby on the screen. He saw the baby kitten of Sigrid on the screen. This is right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So he's just showing me that. So Socrates is showing me that. And it's a question. The question is, and for like animals in general, other than humans, don't really have an intellect in the way that humans do. But they borrow the intellect of the humans around them. So, Mariana, with her huge intellect, is absolutely available to Socrates, and it's allowing this question around, why is it that I'm aging? Why is it that I'm not I don't retain my kitten-like nature? And it's there's kind of like an envy thing running here for Socrates, and it's an envy around the freedom to have fun and, that absolute joy of a kitten, child, human child as well for that matter, but he's thinking about kittens, obviously, as opposed to human babies. And he's actually playing for me the pictures of the kitten that he saw recently. So we've got a number of things going on here, and we're going to do some treatment work for Socrates. So I guess I can point out that there's a communication going on here between myself and Socrates, but also Socrates and Mariana, and obviously because we are talking about an intellectual function, in this treatment work that I'm doing at the moment, I'm connecting into Mariana's intellect without a doubt. So like that's definitely being connected in there as being a surrogate for Socrates. So we're actually going to do some work with the DNA around this aging and the memories. So the memories, well, the pattern or the habit of aging is DNA encoded. So like it's definitely an aspect of the DNA. Not so much the epigenetic stuff. So this is actually pure DNA messaging. So it's interesting. So much of the work that we do is about epigenetics, and that goes for cats as well as it does with humans. But for Socrates himself, we actually need to do some work. So by work, what we're doing is we're just highlighting for Socrates, and then Socrates' body will go ahead and actually make these changes as it sees fit. But the changes that we're looking at here, or the issues that we're highlighting, it's all gonad based. So this is to do with the loss of, the reproductive capacity. And for Socrates, at least I don't know, I've not looked at this in animals generally, but for Socrates, this is about, like my purpose in life has become lost by virtue of the fact of being neutered. So just working with him around highlighting that issue and highlighting that, his role of working with the community there. So the community of 3 humans and however many cats it is there at the moment. I'm picking up about 13 of them that are all involved. So these will be some outside cats as well as the inside ones. But the role of a neutered cat remains actually in this community. So the fact that there is a community, and indeed, that there's new cats coming all the time, is an aspect of it. So I'm just showing all of this to Socrates. Now, what I've just done there, this is an example of exactly what we talked about before. So this is it's my pelvic brain, my sex center, is doing this interrogation and this work with Socrates' sex center. So that's where it's actually happening from. And I've just made a superconscious leap. So that idea of jumping away from the suffering of having had the gonads taken away and, his fertility removed from him, and taking it to the place where he has this role within the community. And it's a growing community because there's always new cats coming, and other humans coming around as well. This is a super conscious leap. It's not a natural. This is not an A plus B equals C. This is a super conscious leap there. And why? But it might sound like it's a logical thing. You say you take away your fertility, but you've still got a role in the family, in this adopted family. But for Socrates, actually within the sex center, this is a huge jump because this is incomprehensible to him. This is not, and he has a fully functioning sex center, just as I, as a human, do. So these are fully functioning minds that are in this communication. And prior to this conversation that we're having at the moment, it would have been inconceivable for Socrates to be able to integrate any of this. Any questions, Marianne?
Oh, I just thought of whether he had trouble to see it as a functional sex center because the pheromones were missing.
The brain misses the hormonal triggering, which is an important messaging for the brain. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. So there's definitely, yeah. So the work, when I say work, what I'm doing is I'm just showing his body, what's going on physically, and that there's an opportunity to create repairs. And the repairs are around, for example, getting that hormonal, the necessary hormonal material from other tissues, because all of these tissues that we're talking about can actually be, all of these hormonal signaling chemicals can actually be manufactured in other tissues in the body. We don't need gonads to make these things. And so we're just making that aware, making his body aware of that, and then it will go about actually reorganizing it on its own. It doesn't need specific interference from anybody. Okay, so what we're going to do now is just actually implement that, because what I'm hearing from Socrates' system is that that's enough. So we're just tapping over our head here just to highlight the fact that we are working with the intellect and the head brain. We're working with the thoracic brain and the emotional center. I'm tapping over my breathing diaphragm, which has a strong relationship with that spinal brain. So I'm focusing on the spinal brain as I tap over the breathing diaphragm. Tap over the gut brain for the instinctive center. Tap over the pelvic brain for the sex center. Take a couple of breaths, and that's actually all that's necessary for Socrates. So Socrates is picking that up. Tell me what's your feeling about what Socrates is picking up here, Marianne? in his conscious minds?
He had a couple of very deep sighs now. So he might have accepted something.
Yeah. So what he's accepting there is that there is a progression that's going on, and the progression is, that he's no longer a kitten, but that there is plenty of excitement, available to him in this environment where he is at the moment. So I'm just sharing with him that there's likely to be some kittens at some point actually turning up there at the sanctuary, and that you might have some fun with them too.
We are very close of having some kittens here because Felicitas, a cat in the village, is coming up here because she doesn't find enough food. And having a look at her, I would say she has kittens about 10 weeks old. So sooner or later, she won't be able anymore to feed them, and she will bring them, or at least show them the place where they might find something to eat.
Okay, so anyway, look, that work with Socrates was finished, and that's interesting. Socrates was picking all that up from what you're saying there, and he certainly knows what you were talking about. He knows about that. So I'm just going to hop off the machine, and then we can finish up our little talk, because we've probably gone well over our time.
Oh, we still in time, but not much left.
All right. So I will. However that works. So you've seen all this before, so there's nothing there which is new news to you, but for other people, I'm sure that what they're just seeing there is a little bit different. And it's certainly an interesting example. I'm sorry. Let's turn that around. Sorry. It's an interesting example that came up there was the work of Socrates. As you were talking about there before, the work with the coherence device is not limited to humans, and it is about coherence between brains, physical brains and minds. And we had a wonderful example there where we were actually working with a mind of a human, yourself, then the 5 minds of the cat, and me here as well. So that's a wonderful example for people to actually see. And what you're reflecting back there and talking about, him having those sighs as we did that work, that's exactly what's going on. He's recognizing it.
Interesting for me that he obviously is pondering about kitten, and something in between, whether he should allow the kittens here as a chief, which wouldn't be too good, but on the other hand, he might want to have kitten around because it's much more fun. And he's in between, and feels a lot of contradictions and conflicts inside. It could be why he is behaving that way, and Tigris is behaving that way. And yes, I will tell you the next days what comes up here.
Okay, well, I'll look forward to hearing that. That's great. So I feel as though that's actually been a pretty reasonable look, preliminary look at the coherence device, and it'll be really interesting once we get the new version for operation, particularly with the app structure and so on and so forth, and we'll be able to have a follow-up perhaps at some point.
Yes, we will do a follow-up, definitely. And for those who are more interested in the concepts of the 5 minds, I would say we will do just some Gurdjieff workshop in August or something like that.
Okay.
Just to dig a bit deeper into that concept, which is mainly forgotten in the Western world. Gurdjieff has been one of those mystics and those philosophers in the 20th century who unfortunately passed away in mid of the century, but not many remember him and his marvelous work. And maybe we should just point that out a little bit and speak a bit about the school of your father so that people step by step can tune in and align to these marvelous Gnostic concepts.
Yeah. Well, let's do that. Let's do that. Absolutely. So thank you for the
Thank you.
opportunity of talking about this. It's been good.
Yes, and I will keep you updated on Socrates and Tigris and the kitten and Felicitas.
Perfect. That's wonderful.
So I say bye to everybody. And whoever wants to have a test and try with the coherence machine, just give Neil a call or message to him. We have his free session booking on the website so that you can just do a test with the coherence machine and, yes, tune in yourself.
Perfect.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Neil. And till next time, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow at the Sundowner. Yes, that's it.
That's